The wind stopped first. That was the part nobody could explain later, not the shape on the road, not the cold that clung to their skin like wet cloth. The wind. It just stopped, all at once, like something had reached out and closed its hand around the whole mountain. Tyler didn't notice it right away. He was too busy laughing, one arm looped around Marcus's waist as the motorcycle bounced over a pothole. Behind him, Jessica had her chin pressed into his shoulder blade, her arms locked so tight around his ribs it almost hurt. "Dude, slow down," Tyler said, half laughing. "You're gonna kill us before we even get there." "Relax," Marcus called back over the engine. "Best view in the county's up this road. Trust me." They'd started the night simple. A visit to a friend's place after work, a stop at the downtown night market for skewers and cold soda, and then Tyler's idea, the one that changed everything. "We should hit the garden," he'd said, grinning like it was the best idea he'd had all year. "The mountain one. Nobody goes up there at night. It'll be wild." Jessica had hesitated. Something about the way he said it made her stomach twist, just slightly, like her body knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. But she said yes anyway. 3 friends, 1 bike, 1 bad decision. That was how these stories always started. They gassed up at the station at the edge of town, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, moths slapping against the glass. Then Marcus turned the bike onto the long road that curled up into the hills, toward the barangay where the garden waited, dark and closed for the night. The higher they climbed, the more the world changed around them. The streetlights thinned out, then vanished completely. The trees on either side pressed closer, black shapes swallowing the last of the moonlight. And the silence, that was the thing Jessica would remember most. Not quiet. Silence. The kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breath, like the night itself was listening. "It's so dark," Jessica whispered. "That's the point," Tyler said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. 5 minutes. 6, maybe. The bike's headlight cut a narrow, trembling tunnel through the black. When they finally reached the barangay, the houses were shuttered, windows dark, not a single light burning anywhere. 3 more minutes brought them to the garden entrance, a wrought iron gate, chained shut, a faded sign swinging gently on one hinge even though there was no wind to move it. "Closed," Marcus said flatly. "Of course it's closed." Nobody laughed this time. They agreed to head back, but Marcus didn't want to retrace the same road. "There's a shortcut," he said. "Steeper, but faster. Trust me." That phrase again. Trust me, Jessica would think about those 2 words for the rest of her life. The new road twisted downward, narrow and unlit, gravel crunching under the tires. Marcus kept telling them to lean back, to counter the steep grade, his voice tighter with every turn. Tyler told him to slow down. Marcus didn't answer. And then, without warning, the engine seemed to hitch, just for a fraction of a second, like it had caught on something in the air. Marcus's hands tensed on the handlebars. "Guys," he said, and his voice had changed completely. "There's someone on the road." Jessica followed his gaze past his shoulder, out into the dark. And there, standing motionless at the very edge of the path, was the outline of a man. His back was to them. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking, wasn't stumbling, wasn't doing anything a person out for a late walk should be doing. He simply stood there, facing away, as still as the trees around him, as if he had been standing in that exact spot for a very long time, waiting for someone to finally come around the bend. The bike's headlight swept over him for less than a second. But that was long enough for Jessica to notice something wrong about the way his shoulders sat. Something wrong about how he didn't cast a shadow, even with the light pouring directly onto him. Marcus's whole body started to shake. "Go," Tyler said, his voice cracking. "Go, go, go dash." The bike lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, and for one terrifying second Jessica thought they were going to lose control completely and go tumbling down the mountainside. Marcus was trembling so hard the handlebars rattled in his grip, but somehow, some way, he kept them upright, kept them moving, kept them alive. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared to. The figure disappeared behind them in the dark, swallowed by the black trees, gone from sight in an instant. But being out of sight didn't mean being out of mind. If anything, not being able to see it made everything worse. Jessica's imagination filled in every detail her eyes had missed, the two still shoulders, the shape that seemed almost human and almost not, the absence of a shadow where a shadow should have been. "What was that?" Tyler said. It wasn't really a question. His voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, like he was afraid saying it louder might summon it back. "I don't know," Marcus said. I don't know. Dash." He was repeating it like a prayer, like if he said it enough times the universe might actually give him an answer that made sense. None came. The road kept twisting downward, and the cold, Jessica noticed it again, sharper now, biting through her jacket in a way that felt deliberate. Not like weather. Like something reaching for her specifically. And then it happened. It came from behind. That was the only way Jessica could ever describe it afterward, not a sound, not a smell, not anything she could point to and say there, that's the evidence, just a presence. A weight settling onto the seat behind her, exactly where no one was sitting, exactly where 3 people and a motorcycle should have had empty space and nothing else. Her body went rigid. She felt it the way you feel someone standing too close behind you in a dark room, that primal, ancient part of the brain that knows, before any of the 5 senses confirm it, that you are no longer alone. In front of her, wedged between Marcus and Jessica, Tyler suddenly gasped and threw both arms around Marcus's waist, burying her face into his jacket. Her whole body had gone stiff, shoulders hunched, eyes screwed shut so tightly it looked painful. "Don't look," Tyler said, muffled against the fabric. "Don't you dare look, Jess, don't look back. Dash." Jessica didn't need to be told twice. Every instinct in her body was already screaming the same warning. But knowing not to look and being able to stop herself from looking were 2 very different things. Her neck ached with the effort of holding still. Her eyes burned, straining at the corners, some deep animal curiosity fighting against every ounce of self-preservation she had left. She kept them forward. Barely. The weight didn't move. It didn't shift, didn't press harder, didn't do anything except sit there, patient in a way that felt worse than any sudden violence could have. Jessica thought of every ghost story she'd ever heard as a kid, every warning her grandmother had given her about roads like this one, about the hour after midnight, about never, ever looking back when something called your name in the dark. Nobody had called her name. Not out loud, anyway. But she felt it. A pull, faint and cold, right at the base of her skull, like fingers hovering an inch from her skin, like something was waiting for her to turn around and invite it the rest of the way in. "Jesus," Marcus was saying now, over and over, barely audible over the engine. "Jesus, Jesus, please, get us out of here." Dash. Tyler picked it up too, her voice shaking, half sob and half whispered prayer. Jessica joined them without deciding to, the words falling out of her mouth on instinct, some deep buried part of her reaching for the only thing that felt like it might actually help. The road wouldn't end. That was the worst part. Every turn revealed another stretch of black asphalt, another wall of silent trees, and the weight behind Jessica did not lift, did not lessen, did not give any sign that it intended to leave. 5 minutes stretched into something that felt like an hour. And then, up ahead, through the dark. A light. It was faint at first, just a smear of orange against the black, easy to mistake for nothing at all. But as the bike rounded the final bend, the light sharpened into something real, a single bulb burning above the door of a small church, its whitewashed walls glowing faintly in the dark like something out of a dream. Marcus didn't slow down so much as he simply lost the strength to keep going. The bike rolled to a stop in the gravel lot outside the church, and the moment the engine died, Jessica felt it. The weight lifted. Not gradually. Not like something walking away. It was there, and then, between one breath and the next, it was gone, like it had simply ceased to exist the instant they crossed onto the church grounds. The cold that had been clawing at her skin for the past 20 minutes eased into something almost normal, and for the first time since the mountain garden, Jessica realized she could hear her own heartbeat clearly, without that suffocating pressure behind her ears. All three of them scrambled off the bike at the same time, legs unsteady, and stood there in the gravel lot just breathing, just existing, just grateful to be somewhere with light. "It's gone," Tyler said. Her voice cracked on the second word. "Is it gone? Please tell me it's gone." "I think so," Jessica said. She still hadn't turned around. Some small, cowardly part of her refused to test it. "I don't feel it anymore." Marcus sank down onto the church steps, elbows on his knees, hands laced behind his neck like he was bracing for impact. "What was that?" he said again, quieter this time, more exhausted than afraid. "What the hell was that?" Nobody had an answer. That was the thing about nights like this one, they didn't come with explanations. They came with questions that would follow you home, into your bed, into every dark road you'd ever drive again for the rest of your life. Jessica sat down next to him, arms wrapped around herself, still shivering even though the cold had mostly passed. "The man on the road," she said slowly. "You saw him too, right? Both of you saw him." "I saw him," Marcus said immediately. Tyler nodded, arms crossed tight over her chest. "His back was to us." "He wasn't," she stopped, swallowed, tried again. "He wasn't standing like a person stands. It's hard to explain. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong." "No shadow," Jessica said. The headlight hit him and he didn't cast a shadow. Silence settled over the three of them, broken only by the faint tick of the motorcycle engine cooling in the lot beside them. "We can't go back that way," Marcus finally said. "Not tonight. Not ever." "There's no other road," Tyler pointed out, voice small. "Then we wait here until it's light out," Marcus said. "I don't care how long it takes. I'm not getting back on that bike until the sun's up." Nobody argued with him. They sat on the steps of that small church for what felt like hours, watching the dark tree line at the edge of the lot, half expecting to see a silhouette detach itself from the shadows and start walking toward them. It never did. But the fear didn't fade either, it just settled into something quieter, something that lived under the skin instead of on top of it. Around them, the church stood silent and still, a small stone building that had probably seen 100 years of storms and mountain fog, and Jessica found herself grateful for every single one of those years, for whatever had kept this place standing, kept it safe, kept it lit against a mountain that clearly held things no one wanted to meet after dark. It was nearly an hour before any of them spoke again. "We're not the first," Tyler said quietly. "Are we? People who've seen it?" Marcus looked up at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean a road like that," Tyler said. "A spot like that. Things like that don't just show up once. They're always there. Waiting. We just happen to be the ones who drove past at the wrong time." The words hung in the cold night air, and none of them could think of a single reason to argue. The sun rose just after 6, and with it came a fragile, uneasy kind of relief. Marcus was the first to stand, stretching muscles that had gone stiff from hours sitting on cold stone steps. The church behind them looked almost ordinary in the daylight, small, humble, paint peeling slightly at the corners of the windows. It was hard to believe that a few hours earlier, it had felt like the only safe place left in the world. "We should go," Marcus said. "Before it gets dark again. Before anything changes its mind." Nobody asked what he meant by that. They all understood. The ride back down the mountain, in full daylight, felt like a completely different road. The trees that had loomed like black sentinels the night before were just trees now, ordinary, green, swaying gently in a breeze that had returned sometime after sunrise. The silence had a texture to it that felt natural again, filled with birdsong and the distant hum of someone's radio from a house down the hill. They passed the spot. All three of them felt it happen, the exact moment the bike rolled past the place where the figure had stood the night before. Marcus slowed down without meaning to, and all three of them stared at the empty stretch of road, half expecting, half dreading, to see something there in the light. There was nothing. Just gravel, just weeds growing up through a crack in the asphalt, just an ordinary bend in an ordinary road that gave absolutely no indication it had ever hosted anything unnatural. "Doesn't look like anything," Tyler murmured. "That's what scares me most," Jessica said. They didn't stop. Nobody suggested it, and nobody would have agreed to it even if someone had. The bike carried them the rest of the way down without incident, and by the time they reached the edge of town, the whole night felt almost like something they'd dreamed together, some shared hallucination brought on by too little sleep and too much imagination. Almost. Except Jessica couldn't shake the memory of that weight settling onto the seat behind her. Couldn't shake the way her skin had crawled, the way something ancient and instinctual in her had screamed "Don't look, don't look, don't look" the entire time. Dreams didn't feel like that. Dreams didn't leave your hand still trembling 6 hours later. That evening, unable to stop thinking about it, Jessica did something she probably shouldn't have. She searched the name of the barangay, the mountain garden, the road, anything she could think of, scrolling through late-night forum posts and old local news articles until her eyes burned from the screen's glow. She found it almost by accident. A short article, nearly 10 years old, buried 3 pages deep in search results. A man had died on that exact stretch of road, struck by a vehicle whose driver never stopped, never came forward, was never identified. He had been walking home from visiting family, the article said, in the hour just after sunset, on a road that had no streetlights and no warning signs and no reason for anyone to expect danger. The article didn't include a photo. It didn't need to. Jessica sat there in the dark of her room, phone screen casting pale light across her face, and felt the same cold that had crawled up her spine the night before settle over her all over again. She called Tyler first, then Marcus, and read them the article word for word. Nobody said anything for a long moment after she finished. "We have to tell someone," Tyler finally said. "Tell them what?" Marcus asked, his voice flat. "That we saw a ghost. That something sat behind Jess on the bike and none of us have any proof it happened." "We know it happened," Jessica said quietly. "That has to count for something." But even as she said it, she understood what Marcus meant. There was nothing to show anyone. No photograph, no video, nothing but 3 shaken voices insisting they'd felt something that logic said couldn't possibly be real. Except they all knew what they'd felt. And knowing was its own kind of proof, even if it never convinced anyone else. That night, none of them slept easily. And in the days that followed, a new detail began to surface, something none of them had noticed in the panic of the moment, something that would change the way they understood what had happened on that mountain road forever. It was Marcus who noticed it first. 3 days later, going through the phone he'd nearly forgotten was recording that night, a habit from filming random clips of the ride for social media, something he did on nearly every trip without thinking twice about it. He'd almost deleted the video without watching it. Almost. When he finally sat down and pressed play, his stomach dropped somewhere down around his knees. The footage was shaky, dark, mostly useless, just headlight beams cutting through black trees, the sound of the engine, muffled voices laughing before everything had gone wrong. But near the middle of the clip, right as the bike rounded the bend where the figure had stood, something was there. Not clearly. Not in a way anyone could hold up as undeniable proof. Just a shape, barely visible at the very edge of the frame, standing exactly where Jessica remembered him standing, back turned exactly the way she remembered. But it was what happened a few seconds later that made Marcus's hands go cold around the phone. In the video, right as the headlight passed over the figure, it began to turn. Slowly. Deliberately. As if it had all the time in the world. The footage cut off before the turn completed. The moment, Marcus realized with a sick lurch in his stomach, that he'd panicked and swerved, that his thumb had accidentally hit the button and killed the recording. But in those last 2 seconds, just before the screen went black, something about the shape had changed. The shoulders had shifted. The head had begun to tilt, ever so slightly, toward the road. Toward them. Marcus sent the video to Jessica and Tyler within minutes, and the group call that followed lasted almost 2 hours, all three of them replaying those final 2 seconds over and over, trying to convince themselves they'd imagined the movement, trying and failing every single time. "He was starting to look at us," Tyler said, voice barely above a whisper. "He was starting to turn around." Nobody could argue with what they'd all seen. And that was almost worse than not having any proof at all, because now there was something. Something small, and dark, and undeniable, sitting in a video file that none of them could bring themselves to watch again, but that none of them could bring themselves to delete either. They never went back to that mountain. Not the garden, not the shortcut, not that road at all. Even years later, mentioning the barangay by name was enough to make all three of them go quiet, exchange a look, and quickly change the subject. Jessica still thinks about it sometimes, usually late at night, usually when the wind outside her window goes suddenly, unnaturally still. She thinks about the weight that settled behind her on that bike seat, patient and cold and waiting. She thinks about the man who died on that road 10 years earlier, walking home in the dark with no one to see it happen, no one to stop for him, no one to even know his name. And she wonders, some nights, whether he's still out there. Standing at the edge of that road. Waiting for the next headlights to come around the bend. Waiting for someone new to finally turn around and look. Sometimes she catches herself doing the math, 10 years before they drove that road, and how many years might pass before someone else does. How many other headlights have swept across the gravel since, how many other passengers have felt that same cold weight settle in behind them without ever knowing why. She used to think it was a story that belonged only to the three of them. Now she isn't so sure. Marcus deleted his social media accounts a month later. He couldn't stand the thought of that video sitting somewhere, backed up, existing long after he was gone. Tyler stopped riding motorcycles altogether. She isn't sure if it's really about the bike anymore, or about the dark itself. As for Jessica, she kept the article. Printed it out, folded it into a small square, tucked it into a drawer she rarely opens. On nights when the wind outside her window goes suddenly, unnaturally still, she takes it out and reads it again, as if rereading it might change the ending, might give the man on that road a name she could finally say out loud. It never does. Just a man, unnamed in the report, struck and left on a road with no witnesses. No closure. Just the quiet suggestion that some part of him might still be walking that stretch of asphalt, waiting for a set of headlights to slow down long enough to notice him. She still won't drive past that barangay, even in daylight, even with a full car of people and the radio turned all the way up. Some roads don't forget who's traveled them. And some things standing at the edge of the dark aren't waiting for you to see them. They're waiting for you to look back.